About 2 weeks ago, I had a video called Comic Shit That I'm Absolutely Done With, and it was my personal grievances, 5 things that I just couldn't take that Marvel and DC have been doing, and there was a bit of a call to action. I said, I want to hear what you guys think is the worst thing going on. Maybe not to destroy comic books, it just kills your love for comic books and makes you not want to stick around. And there was an enormous response to the video. In fact, there was well over 400 comments on it. I decided to go through those and kind of tabulate them up and see what is it that comic book fans are actually tired with. And I was going to do a top 5. 3 of the responses basically tied for number 4. So it's going to be a top 6. But I really did like the outpouring of support on this one. Really, there's only direct correlation or overlap with one of my grievances in here. And there's like 50-50 kind of correlation overlap with one of the grievances I had that you actually had. I thought it was a really interesting list. So let's get started. First up in a tie for 4 was too many events. This is what Nick XC had to say. I'm tired of there being an event every month. It used to be a long buildup to one event. Now we have back-to-back event. They don't mean anything anymore. Too many events is certainly an enormous issue. We went from Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths to Lazarus Planet to Night Terrors to Gotham War and then right into Beast World. Almost no breaks through there for over a year straight where basically you had DC Comics events going on. And the problem is none of them were good. Beast World was pretty fun, but by and large, people weren't really enjoying it. And guess what happened on Beast World? It absolutely tanked. No one bought it because no one cares about these events anymore. And Marvel's absolutely somehow worse. And they always have to tie in Spider-Man to every event. So if you want to be a Spider-Man fan and read ASM, you end up having to reverse into the event that you wanted to avoid in the first place. And it gets very, very frustrating as a fan in the Spider-Man event. Oh my goodness. Gang War is literally just a bunch of nondescript random gangs, the Kangaroo Kicks and the Martian Sidekicks, fighting for territory in Harlem or something. It's a bunch of characters that you don't really know or care about, not really well set up, and they're just fighting for 29 issues, and they just mean nothing. They're not fun, they're not exciting, and they have got to rethink this, and it's gotten totally out of hand. Totally agree with you guys. There are too many events out there. Next up, you had, in a tie for 4th, Sexuality retcons. This is what Wayne Tech said. What got me to stop reading new comics was the content. Suddenly, every likable element of many characters was replaced with their gay romance stories, and any marquee big name had to be replaced, depowered, upstage, made to look inferior because of something unresolved in the writer's past. Not really a big Marvel expert, but in DC, Tim Drake, John Kent, Harley Quinn, Maxima, Poison Ivy, and others are basically useless characters. I won't pick up a book if they're featured because I know the story will be garbage. Because a lot of the times, the character is not allowed to be a superhero anymore. When they turned Bobby Drake gay, when Brian Michael Bendis had Jean Grey like mind meld him or whatever and convince him he was gay, it just became a LGBTQ coming of age like romance comic book, and he's just like making out with random dudes left and right. And you're like, that's not really why I came to read an X-Men book, or certainly not why I came to know and love Bobby Drake. For the most part, he was a superhero that had a little bit of romance and slice of life stuff on the side, which is really just the cherry on top. But they've made it the foundation for all these characters, and it has certainly turned off a lot of people. Just look what's happening with Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, this week. If you read issue number 4, the emotional resonance that's kind of comes along with the hero's journey is just completely pushed to the side because the character is now LGBTQ representative, and if they don't remind you every single episode or every panel on every page, it feels like, that this character is in fact now LGBTQ representative, they don't feel like they're doing their job, which just makes it an enormous turnoff. And I don't blame a lot of people for not trusting books featuring a John Kent, a Tim Drake, a Bobby Drake, an Alan Scott, because you see the writers that they bring in on these characters, and they're always terrible. The other big complaint that was in a tie for 4th place was the bait and switch invariant cover schemes. This is what Snake Brown said. Beautiful covers, horrible interiors. Someone like Nick Bradshaw will draw you in with a fantastic cover, and then you open the book and it's absolutely amateur hour. I would rather they give this guy a year to do 3 issues or a 3 to 4 issue run on a book than 40 covers in a year. It's borderline false advertising, given the lack of talent handling the penciling duties. And there are about 10 of these jabronis who just do covers now. There's nothing worse than you get like a just really great cover and you're like, oh man, who's this artist? You open it up, it's stick figures. There's no visual storytelling. There's no detail. There's no backgrounds. They try to go photorealistic rather than going superheroic, which needs a little bit of exaggeration within the artwork itself. And you feel duped when you see that badass, really cool cover and you open it up and it just looks like shit. You know, the baseline price for a Marvel book featuring a C, B, or A-list character or team is $5. And it's basically the same thing over at DC. And I definitely feel that. I feel the burn on the variant covers, and I definitely feel a lot of frustration when it comes to the bait and switch covers. A lot of people put that one out there. Now let's get into this top three. These are the ones that definitely separated themselves from the pack. The three things that people hated the most in order with the total number of comments that people made about it. At number 3, character deconstruction. This is the way Brad Evans explained it. For me, the most egregious things comics have ever done was the recent treatment of the Punisher, the complete destruction of beloved and long-established characters simply because Marvel executives don't agree with the politics of the character's fans. It's stupid, it's petty, it's self-destructive. It shows what Marvel really thinks of their fans, and it's the reason I will never buy another Marvel comic again. They never really build them back up anymore. They just tear down your favorite character piece by piece by piece, and certainly the Punisher is a fantastic example. I remember on that final issue from Jason Aaron, where he doesn't just take everything away to where his wife was about to leave him, she was going to take the kids, but he also is like in a room tied up. Doctor Strange comes in, chastises him. Wolverine comes in, chastises him. Black Widow comes in, she chastises him, and basically says everything to the character that the author really thinks about the Punisher. And it is so frustrating as a reader, especially if you're a Punisher fan, that that's your big payoff, that the character that you like, the story you were enjoying, was just an enormous FU at the end. Nobody wants to invest themselves in these characters in these universes to, in the end, be told that they made a huge mistake. Like, just think about what they're doing with Batman now. Batman is the most successful American superhero comic book character in the industry right now, has been for quite some time. At this point, they took his dignity with the Tom King run. They killed Alfred in the Tom King run. They took his money in the James Tynion run. They ended up taking his family in the Chip Zdarsky run. They took his apartment in the Chip Zdarsky run, and he basically has nothing left other than the identity of Batman. But I don't think they're actually doing this to build the character back up like a Nightfall, where you take the character down to his lowest and show that he's going to overcome it. I think they're just removing all this stuff because they don't like it, because they don't actually like who Batman is, but they want to write Batman because he's so popular, and that's a way to boost your career and whatever. Character deconstruction is something that people have been tired of at least a decade at this point, and it's only gotten worse and worse, and they have to find a new way to tell a story with characters maybe that wasn't inspired by Alan Moore, in the 80s and 90s. Perhaps we're far enough away from that we can do a new type of story. Coming in at number 2, according to the commenters, DEI-driven comic books. I was surprised this wasn't number 1, but it did come in at number 2. This is what Kunlun Kung Fu had to say. My number 1 biggest issue in comics is the incessant need to replace older characters with newer, younger characters. My biggest example, and the one that really makes me want to quit comics for good, is Iron Fist Danny Rand being replaced by Swordmaster Lin Lee. It really feels like Marvel caved to Twitter pressure and decided to strip Danny not only of his powers, but of his identity as well. They want to take the identity off the established hero like a Danny Rand, or in the case of maybe like a Tony Stark Iron Man, and then place it on top of the new character that they think is more inclusive. It's more DEI friendly for the purposes of publishing and really reshaping their line for the audience that they wish were coming in to Marvel and DC Comics and obviously your comic book shops every Wednesday. It never has worked, yet they continuously go on and on and on with this. Apparently it's stereotypical and racist to have a white character with martial arts skills. That is some of the most weird backwards fucking logic I've ever heard in my life. It's like we're regressing when it comes to our ideas about inclusivity and diversity and stuff like this. But that's almost all a lot of these publishers like Marvel and DC, and certainly in entertainment, can think about is this DEI inclusive? Is this going to give us a good ESG score? And they're even doing it with a lot of the ways that they hire creators now. Well, we have a younger, a black female character. We have to have a writer, and that's black and female. We have a gay male character. We have to have a writer that's gay and male. And they're now casting, using DEI as the core principles, the creators themselves to the characters without ever actually thinking about, is this the writer that has the best story for the character? They don't want to tell fantastic superhero stories. They want, I guess, the most authentic representation that they can get. But who actually comes to Marvel and DC Comics for authentic representation? You come to DC and Marvel Comics for these wonderful universes where things that could never happen in our universe are actually going on a day-to-day basis. And they never even think about this stuff. And they are certainly using these DEI principles to hire their driving for the editorial staff, the actual people that are full-time employees for Marvel and DC, and then they're using those principles to hire the writers and cast writers into the roles. And it's basically kind of blown up in their faces, but they believe in it to such a degree that they can't give it up at this point. That new audience is eventually going to show up, even though it's been a decade at this point and nobody showed up because nobody cared. This is the number one thing that you guys said in the comment section that you couldn't take anymore. This is what you've had enough with. This is the comic shit you're absolutely done with. Constant reboots to number one. This is what David Allen had to say. I really wish Marvel would simply put the year on the book so I know which run I'm buying without having to open the book. Reboots are generally where I give up on a title. Vengeance of the Moon Knight is where I stop that series. This isn't a woke problem. This isn't an SJW problem. This is a short-term thinking problem that is absolutely plaguing both Marvel and DC. Certainly more Marvel, but it's certainly creeped into DC Comics at this point. This is the way I understand it. The Flash book that just rebooted to number one under Science Barrier isn't going to make it to 10 issues. We just had a Captain America series fronted by Steve Rogers last 12 issues before a reboot. That is the state of what should be maybe not A-list characters, but certainly B-list characters. Strong sellers for decades upon decades can't even last a calendar year anymore because the planning of Marvel and DC and the writers that they're hiring are so terrible that the sales just die almost immediately after having that number one issue bump. And you get your sales bump and all your variant covers to kind of cover up all the problems. And then you go exactly where they were before, but it drops even lower than that. It's actually a proven fact. Over time, the more you reboot, the more the book suffers in the long term. How many times have they rebooted Captain Marvel? 13 times at this point. How many times have they rebooted Miss Marvel at this point? How many number ones has she had over the last decade? I think it's 12. It might actually be more than that. There's no reason to invest in your favorite character. There's no reason to invest in your favorite universe. There's no reason really to invest in your favorite writer because they likely won't even last a year on the book to actually tell a fully fleshed out, involved, cohesive story. And that is absolutely turning people off left and right. And people just don't have faith in any of these titles. It doesn't matter what the character is. Within 2 or 3 years, it's going to be rebooted again. Do you think Amazing Spider-Man is going to go over 100 issues? Absolutely not. Once it gets to 100, they'll reboot it so they can charge you $9 for the number one issue. And then issue number 2 will be issue 901 or something like that. So they can charge you $12. I don't personally follow characters anymore, even though I certainly have my favorite characters in the Marvel, DC, Valiant universe and all that kind of stuff. I just go and follow the writers because even if they only got 8 issues to tell some stories there, and maybe it wasn't great and they didn't get to finish whatever they started, I'll just move on to the next title with them because there are only so many comic book writers that are competent these days. And that is the shit that everyone's talking about that is absolutely driving their love of comic books away. I do hope there's some editors out there from DC and Marvel that are listening to this because these are the feelings of real comic book fans. I went there, looked at them, go and see the comments yourself. And this is the stuff that stood out each and every time. This is the stuff that nobody can take anymore. If you are a big old nerd like this guy right here and you want more comic book talk, I do have good news for you. You don't need to go to Marvel. You don't need to go to DC to enjoy comic books. You can go to the Thinking Critical Patreon where we have 8 hours of brand new content every single week featuring your favorite guests like Doc, Aaron Sparrow, and Jim from Weird Science DC. That is the place to be if you want to have some fun with comic books, because it certainly ain't Marvel and DC. There's a link in the video description.